Good day everyone, Abyss Full of Goats here, and yes, I know it's been a while. Yeah, sorry about that, work's been a bit hectic recently. But anyway, today we're going to take a look at Pharaoh's Servant, a set while not overall as powerful as Spell Ruler, was still a defining set for Yu-Gi-Oh! For years, with some of its cards seen played as late as 2009, and one was so good it was one of the best cards in the game as far as 2018. Now, I was originally going to say that this set did for trap cards what Spell Ruler did for spells, because it did give us many of the game's best purple cards in the early years, but looking back it also gave us just as many good spell cards, so I think a better way of summarising this set would be it was the first set where monsters aren't the primary focus, with many DM era defining back row appearing first in this set. In addition to this, there is one important first in this set that we'll get into very soon, so without any further ado, let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, the search is over. That's right, the 4 sets, one of the highest cards to pull in one of these was actually worth the effort to find it, with the first great secret rare in Yugioh. A level 6 machine with amazing art by the way, Yugioh was far and away the best tribute monster in the game at this point, so much so in fact that he pretty much defined the large part of 2003 Yu-Gi-Oh! In a format known as Android format, which is Yugioh's OCG name for those who don't know. This is because, in addition to the powerful stats for a 1 tribute, this card is one of the strongest effects printed on a monster at the time. As long as he's first upon the field, neither player can activate any trap cards. Yet, in addition to being a great beater, this card shuts in a decent percent of both players' decks, including some of the most powerful cards in the game at this time, meaning control decks lost 2 of their board wipes in Murder Force and Torrential, aggro decks lost access to hand attack and trap to shoot, and then only negated Solemn Judgment, and burn decks are pretty much totally crippled. A staple of the game's early years, Yugioh pretty much was playable throughout most of the 2000s, seeing play as a Dark in some Chaos decks, as alternative to a second Air Knight Parashat in Go Control, a Pseudo Monarch in 2006 Monarchs, and as a Dark in some Teledad builds, before being kept out of the game in late 2000s, early 2010s. However, he would occasionally find his way into some side decks to combat track heavy decks, most notably as a Mannequin Cat target in Sprite against Labyrinth. Now the only downside to this card is the monster, making it easier to remove than the set's other secret rare, but even still, it wasn't unheard of back in the day for this card to steal games by itself, and that plus its longevity and iconic status in my eyes makes this unquestionably the best secret rare we've covered so far. However, knowing what else is in this set, it won't have to tell very long, I'm afraid. Okay, seriously, 4 sets in and we're still getting these crappy vanillas? What am I going to say? It's a generic looking robot that's a tribute monster with stats to be okay on level 4. Moving on, please. Another bad vanilla. Okay, in all seriousness, I do get it. Not every card in the set can be good, and you need some pack filler. But I ask you, couldn't they be a bit more creative with said pack filler? Honestly, I would genuinely rather have weak effect monsters like Amoeba and Griggle in early sets, because as bad as they were, I could at least imagine some Timmy bringing an insane deck around them, that while not good would at least be memorable in some ways. This, however, can't even do that, and would achieve nothing but filling up bins and shoeboxes. As for the card itself, all I can say is the art has a slightly creepy style to it that set Yu-Gi-Oh! Apart from other TCGs in the early days. That's decent, I guess. Next. See, this is what I was talking about. Is Parasite a good card? No. Do I more say about this card than all the bad vanillas combined? Damn right I do. A level 4 insect, Parasite, upon being flipped, shuffles itself away. If you're thinking, so what? Well, it doesn't shuffle into your deck, no, it shuffles into your opponent's deck. The only card in the game to do so, making this card both unique and a massive flavour win, as like a Parasite, this card burrows into your opponent's deck unexpectedly, waiting dormant until drawn, and then it burrows out to infect the player's whole field, turning all their monsters into insect hosts and draining 1,000 of their life points to boot. Now yes, this card is terrible. It has to survive being flipped to even use its effect. There's literally nothing if the opponent never draws it, and if everything goes to plan, you could just use Tremendous Fire to do the same amount of damage, and turning everything into insects isn't good at all unless you have another card from this set we'll talk about later. But you know what? At least there was some effort put into this card. At least I can imagine some kid at break or on the kitchen table pulling this off and laughing at their friend's misfortune. At least I could say more than 10 words about this card, which makes it infinitely better than all of these awful and pointless vanillas. If we've got our pack filler, more of this please. simple effect that buffs a machine by 700 attack or defense points. Some completed as an OK power-up card, completely overshadowed by a far better machine power-up in the same set, making it without any chance of seeing any play. Also, flavor fail for not doing anything extra with Slot Machine, the card it's clearly supposed to be working with. Next. If you look at the current Yu-Gi-Oh ban list, one thing you'll see a lot of is hand attack cards, or cards that let you take cards from the opponent's hand. Cards like the Spell Ruler Trio we discussed last time have been banned more or less since we had the ban list, except for a couple of formats. And even seemingly weaker hand attack cards like Trapdoor Shooting a Pointed Red Lotus eventually got banned, which is odd when you look at other games like MTG and Lorcana, which have cards like these and even more powerful ones, and no one is calling for their banning. So knowing all this, how bad does a piece of hand attack have to be to not only be unlimited but see no play ever in Yu-Gi-Oh history? Well, let's look at Lightfall's Sword to find out. Like a pointer, Sword takes a card out of the opponent's hand for a non-permanent amount of time, in this case 4 whole turns, and there's also no cost. So why has this card never seen play? One word: random. You see, what makes hand attack cards so powerful is 1, they should take any card of the opponent's hand, pretty much giving you non-attacking removal for anything you can't deal with on the field, and 2, the requirement of perfect hand knowledge, allowing you to plan your turn around knowing what's coming at you. Lightfall's Sword fulfills neither requirement by being random, meaning you don't get to see the opponent's hand, and you can't be sure you did any actual damage to your opponent's game plan with this card. And that, my friends, is how you make a hand attack card so bad even Yu-Gi-Oh players won't try to use it. Up next we've got another example of an experimental card that, while interesting, was too situational to be good, in Chain Destruction. A normal trap, destruction targets any monster with 2000 or less attack points on summon, and then destroys any copies of the card in the opponent's hand and deck, but not in the field. Now I can see some ways the card could be useful. For example, you could use it to empty a Chaos deck of Recruiters if they summon a Shining Angel or Mystic Tomato, and you can also use this in some modern Yu-Gi-Oh formats against deck that summons its hand traps for Link or Synchro plays. Again though, like a lot of bad cards in this set, the problem in this card lies in how niche these scenarios are, and thus this card never saw much play other than in the occasional side deck in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! For some reason, this card was banned for over 10 years. A normal trap, Time Seal can skip your opponent's draw phase, essentially being a one-turn Yatta lock, and like Yatta, it was also banned for about 10 years, like I said. Unlike Yatta, however, I've got no idea why. Yes, at the time I can see somewhat why it was banned, with Wing Blast in the format and Riser on the horizon. I guess Commander didn't want players missing potentially 3 draws, so they are the oldest card, but they stayed on the ban list for years, wasn't released for way too long. And really isn't that strong compared to Yatta, who can end the game in one shot. All this can do is be a minor annoyance unless you happen to win on the next turn. Again, I get why this card was played, I get why some people think it was really strong, but I think its power was a bit overhyped. Magician of Fate for the opponent's graveyard. What could possibly go wrong there? Yes, Grave Robber does indeed allow you to take a card from the opponent's graveyard, in theory giving you more access to staples like Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, etc. But sadly there were 2 factors keeping this card from seeing any real play. One was the 2000 life point cost, which in slower, grindier years of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a far bigger penalty than it would be nowadays, as essentially made it far more likely the control decks, the main kind of want this kind of effect, would die to aggro decks much faster. But secondly, and more importantly, although like Lightfall's Sword and Chain Destruction, this card's biggest problem was the lack of control the player had over its usefulness, as sometimes you'd be able to use it to steal staples like I said, and other times you'd just be stuck with this card in your hand waiting for a good target. These 2 factors combined meant this card really saw play by its situational usefulness compared to the more consistent cards like Magician of Faith and Mask of Darkness. Okay, so we talked about how good Burn was in early Yu-Gi-Oh! And you'd think logically Life Gain would be just as good, if maybe a little bit worse. After all, one makes you harder to kill, the other makes your opponent easier to kill. But no, in actuality, Burn is far superior to Life Gain, because it, actually wins you the game, whereas all Life Gain does is make it take longer to kill you, a critical difference when you're not affecting the board at all with either effects. Because of this, the only Life Gain effects worth playing are those either stapled onto other effects, or ones you can access at any time to win in time. and this card fits neither of those categories. All Gift the Mystical Elf does is grant you 300 points per monster on the field, meaning it at best will grant you a hefty 3000 life points, not bad, but most of the time will be between 600 and 1200, meaning that Solemn Wishes outclasses this card in 3 turns, while also staying on the board and fueling Fire Princess. So yeah, this card is essentially the Ukazi of life gain, middle of the road in terms of the cards providing this effect, which for an effect as useless as life gain 9% of the time, makes it absolutely unplayable. Okay, now I literally just spent a minute or so talking about how bad life gain is in early Yu-Gi-Oh! But it gets a lot better when you get a guaranteed 1000 points each turn, and the card giving you life isn't clogging up your zones. Yeah, Eye of Truth, even before we read its effect, is a bad card just because its cost makes players harder to kill with no cost to them. So what does it actually do? Honestly, not much at all, as all Eye of Truth does is make the opponent play with their hand revealed at the cost of giving them 1000 life points a turn if they've got a monster in hand. So like I said, this card will 9 times out of 10 give your opponent a substantial life point increase, and for this you do get hand knowledge, but unlike cards like Trap Dust Shoot or the 3 spell ruler cards, you need another way of dealing with anything you can't deal with on the field. As such, this card is basically useless unless combined with a couple of specific cards like De-Designator. Now we get to the first Upstart Goblin of this set, aka a card that is no way busted, but it's in a lot of play because it's just a solid card. In this case we have Dust Tornado, a normal trap that destroys one spell trap card on the field. So essentially a trapped Mystical Space Typhoon. Tornado is a bit worse than that card, as you can play it from your hand on your own turn like you can MST, but it did see play alongside the Quick Play spell in Goat and Reaper formats, as not only did it give decks another way of dealing with cards like Mirror Force, but also had another ability that, while situational, could occasionally come up. That being that when stealthily activated, this card allows you to set one spell trap from your hand. Now I know it seems like this is pretty bad, but if I just want to set backward during your opponent's turn when it can't be activated, but it does have one use, saving cards in your hand from being discarded by chaining Dust Tornado to them. For example, you can set a card off of this in response to a Morphing Jar to keep that card safe. Like I said, that card isn't overpowered or anything, but the fact that it was a still for many years makes it one of the better cards to come from this set. Carrying on with the Goat staples in the set, we have the first Monster Reborn replacement in Call of the Haunted, a continuous trap that targets and then revives in attack mode one monster from your graveyard. Seen initially as a fixed Monster Reborn in theory, because it could only target cards in your grave, didn't give you a choice of which mode the monster was summoned into, and kill the summoning target if it left the field. In practice, however, it was pretty much just Monster Reborn and a trap, as most times when a player used Reborn, they were summoning in attack mode anyway, and usually bringing something back from their own graveyard, so these downsides didn't do much. And while the destroy target downside did come up in early Yu-Gi-Oh! With cards like Harpies, Heavy, MST and Dust running about, it didn't happen anywhere near enough this card to see a ton of play. As such, upon Reborn being banned on the first ever ban list, Call of the Haunted, another card from this set, filled its slot very easily, seeing played in 9% of decks up until around 2007, when it and the other card got banned so Monster Reborn could come back for a format or two. Upon coming off the list, Call saw on and off play until Necros format, with the last deck playing it being Tellarknights in Duelist Alliance format. And though it hasn't seen much play in a decade, 11 years as a playable staple counts for a lot, making it in my view one of the best cards from this set. This card skips your standby phase and nothing else. I'm not going to dignify this with a response. Next. Again, this has problem with being too specific that its card text reads its ugly head with Earthshaker. A simple removal trap, Shaker destroys one monster on the opponent's field. However, like a lot of bad cards in this set, this card's biggest failure is you have no control over what dies. Firstly, the opponent needs 2 monster attributes on the field for this even to work, and secondly, they get to pick the monster which is destroyed from those 2 attributes, meaning they will always pick the one that's best for them. Heck, even when this card was appeared in the anime they knew this, with Kaiba picking his Vampire Lord to be destroyed because it came back next turn, as everyone else will. Honestly, this card just let you pick which card was destroyed. It still wouldn't have been good, but it would have been downside better than this abomination. Next. This card gains you life points equal to an attacking monster's attack points. It doesn't destroy the monster, doesn't prevent the attack, or even prevent the damage it dealt. So as you can see, this may be the worst life gain effect in this set. It may have activated in response to a direct attack. This card does literally nothing, and even if you are gaining more life than you're losing in the attack, you still get -1 for a tiny bit of life you'll likely lose next turn because you're wasting deck space on crap like this. I think what truly shows how bad this card is though is that the following fact. A few sets later, a card called Draining Shield was released, which not only gains you life points in the same way, but also negates the attack, making it a direct upgrade from this card, and it still saw no play. Do I need to say anything else? I remember seeing this card for the first time when Mai played it against Yugi in the anime, and thinking, wow, that's a broken card, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Then I saw the actual card and realised how one extra line can completely ruin a card effect. A continuous trap card, Mirror Wall, will have the attack of any opposing attacking monsters, making them much easier to run over, and in the anime, that's all this card did, making it broken good. And if this card just said this, it would have been an absolute staple in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Sadly, the real version has another line of text that makes it a lot worse, that being it has a maintenance cost of 2,000 life points a turn. This makes this card a lot less useful as you'll likely only get 1 to 2 use out of it, making it more in line with a card like Sakuretsu Armor than an anti-attack card, and in that light it falls short, because why just cut a monster's points in half once, when there are many traps at the time capable of just wiping the monster off the field, and apparently other players thought so too, as this card only saw play in very early Duel Links, when the card pool was super limited. Well, next. So last set we saw MST, and in this set we got Dust Tornado, so I think it's safe to say that we were in a good time for single target back row hate. So it's a little odd in this set we got not 1, but 2 cards that are not only bad single target back row hate, but bad single target back row hate designed to counter the good ones, in Driven, Snow and Gust, both of which destroy one spell trap card when a trap or spell is destroyed, respectively, meaning they are just Dust Tornadoes that are harder and less useful to use, and they saw as much play as you expect them to, aka none. Again, this set's always specific card design comes back to bite it in the ass, and speaking of which... Up next we have not 1, but 4 pieces of crap, in Metal Detector, World Suppression, Mystic Probe and Armoured Glass, all of which are, like I said, way too specific and effect to ever see play, but are also just really bad cards in general. All these cards do the same thing for different kinds of cards, which is they activate when a card of that type is activated, negate the effects of all the cards with that type for the turn, doing this for continuous spells, field spells, continuous traps and equips respectively. The problem of course being they all target cards which stay on the field and don't destroy them, meaning all these cards do is delay an effect for a turn, and there is never a time when you want to play this over some, removal to take out the problem permanently. Next. Another awful piece of life game, Numinous Healer gains you 1000 points on activation and a further 500 for every copy of the card you played before at this game. Pretty much everything I said about Gift and Javelin also applies here, and that it really has no use anywhere, even in decks like Fire Princess, which revolve around life gain as there are much better options. But in addition to this, because you need to play 3 of it to gain the full effects, it's also pretty much a brick a lot of the time. Next. A continuous trap appropriate allows you to draw 2 cards every time your opponent draws outside of the draw phase, after the first time they draw outside the draw phase. Now again, like many of this set's cards, this looks way too specific to see any play, as often will your opponent draw multiple times a turn consistently. But unlike other cards from this set, this card actually did have a use. Unfortunately, that use was in the most hated type of deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! FTKs. Combined with cards that draw both players' cards, like Hand Destruction and One Day of Peace, allow you to dig through your deck and find a win con, which was usually Exodia. Now these decks weren't very common at the time. There were far easier ways to draw your whole deck for Exodia, like the soon to be released Butterfly Dagger FTK, but this card being playable at all puts it miles ahead of many traps from this set. Another trap from this set only used in obnoxious decks, Forced Requisition forces your opponent to discard a card whenever you do after the first time. So as you can imagine, it saw no play for many years till 2012 when the Dark World Structure deck was released. A deck focused on discarding its own cards for massive advantage, Dark World's control variants sometimes ran this card as a way of quickly emptying opponents' hands with cards like Dark World Dealing, and yes, it was as obnoxious to play against as it sounds. The card faded away in later Dark World decks when players realised they could just go wombo combo and make an unbreakable board as opposed to controlling the game over several turns. So you don't need to worry about this card showing up in modern variants of the deck, No, instead you can just deal with 2 or 3 cards, hand rips, and like 4 or 5 negates. How fun. Rewind to the Parasite entry and replace it with a trap card, and you have DNA Surgery, a continuous trap that changes every monster on the field to a type chosen by this card's controller. And pretty much every interaction with Parasite, which we'll talk about soon, applies here as well. But in addition to that, this card had other uses, including making a whole board massive with limiter removal. So again, this card was a casual favourite of young and inexperienced players in the early 2000s, but again it saw no serious playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! For obvious reasons of it being too specific a card to work. Another example of an all-specific card that could have been okay without its awful maintenance cost, the regulation of tribalizers is to prevent all attacks by monsters of a chosen type, making it a situational but okay floodgate for the time, is what I would have said if it wasn't for the awful maintenance cost that cost retributive a monster every single turn. So again, like Mirror Wall, we have a decent effect, unusable because of the maintenance cost. However, unlike Mirror Wall, this card saw play nowhere, making one of the biggest wastes of space in this set. It took them 4 sets, but they finally made Exodia playable. Like I said in the LOB video, Exodia, despite being the game's first alternative win condition, took a long time to see play due to the glass cannon nature of the deck, as at the time there were no ways to get pieces back from the graveyard, meaning one card's destruction could ruin your entire day. That was until Backup Soldier came out and made the deck a okay role contender for a couple of years. A normal trap, Soldier has the effect of adding up to 3 normal monsters back to your hand from the graveyard, as long as there are 5 more in grave at the time. This meant Exodia decks that weren't OTKs had a chance to see play now, and even though they didn't do too much, it's always nice to see an alternative win con that isn't too irritating to play against like the FTK variants. Once again, we have an all-specific card that never saw any play despite it being good against a couple of staples. In this case, we have Major Riot, which turns any bounce spell played against you into a mass bounce, and then acts like a mini cyber jabber, summoning cards face down up to the number of cards it bounced. So this would be a good counter to cards like Compulsory Evacuation Device, and nothing else relevant at the time. To be a decent effect stuck in an awful card. Next. And now back to this set's good but not broken cards in the form of Ceasefire. A normal trap, Ceasefire flips all monsters face up, and then burns the opponent for 500 points for each of them. In addition to this, the card doesn't trigger any effective flip monsters, making this a very powerful counter in Go formats to many top decks like Go Control and Chaos Variants, as well as a few rogue options like Pac-Man. In fact, this card's anti-flip effect was so strong that many decks at the time cited this card, even if they didn't play any other burn effects. And in Burn itself, it was a staple from the time of its release till death of most flips in 2008-2009, seeing tops in both stall burn strats, where it and burn cards are combined with cards like Gravity Bind for a slow victory, as well as decks like Baboon and Panda Burn, which use big monsters like the aforementioned Baboon and Panda, along with a Jammer Trio to inflict massive amounts of damage for using cards like Ceasefire to finish the opponent off. However, like I said, many flips fell out of favour in the late 2000s, early 2010s, meaning this card's little play in that time other than a small revival in 2017 in Chain Burn vs Zodiacs. But it's very rare for a card to be in Worlds Finals in 2 different decades, so for that I call this one of the best cards in the set. Another card designed to screw over flip effect monsters back in the day, Light of Intervention may not have been as widely played as Ceasefire, but could occasionally be seen as a side deck pick in GOAT metas that are heavy on chaos. This is because as long as this card is on the field, neither player can set any monsters, making this one of the very few ways to summon a monster in face defense position. Like I said, this card can be absolutely crippling to decks like Chaos, Goat and Pac-Man that have relying flips, as by shutting down cards like Magician of Faith, Night Assailant and all the Pac-Man monsters, you're heavily restricting these decks' abilities to both control the board with removal and gain resources with card draw and effects like Faiths, making it much easier for more aggressive decks to beat them. In addition to this card also prevents monsters from being flipped once they are on the field, which may not sound like much until you remember that Book of Moon was a staple around this time, and this card made this 3-of a dead draw, and made it hard to take out big cards like Monarchs in battle. Again, not a staple due to its situational use, but for being a pretty decent side deck tech choice back in the day, I give this card some props. go watch what I said about Ceremonial Bell last time. It's pretty much the same card but in a trap, kind of like Eye of Truth. However, unlike Eye of Truth, both players keep their hand revealed when this card's active. I mean, not only is this card mostly useless like Eye of Truth, but also makes you more vulnerable to cards like Confiscation and Delinquent Duo, because instead of just firing them blindly, your opponent can now wait until they see a good card in your hand to snipe it. So yeah, this card's pretty bad. Next. Ah yes, an old anime favourite. A normal trap, magical hats during the battle phase, lets you set 2 pieces of back row from your deck as 0 attack and defense monsters. The idea being like in the anime for your opponent to miss their intended attack target by shuffling it in with these blanks. The downside being that at the end of the battle phase, both the back row go to the graveyard, which could be good in a first barrel goods kind of way because you're sending 2 cards to the graveyard. Unfortunately, back when this card came out, there weren't many good back row with graveyard effects. And by the time there were some good ones, this card was way too slow to see play. So a fun, interesting idea that was honestly just a gimmick because of the lack of good cards to play with it. Next. Up next on our list of GOAT staples, we have Nobleman of Crossout, a normal spell that upon activation can destroy a monster that's set face down, and if that monster has a flip effect, it can also banish every copy of that card from both players' decks. So yes, this card is absolutely crippling against many Chaos control builds that use cards like Magician of Faith and Magical Merchant. In fact, this card was so good against Chaos that for a while it was an automatic staple in GOAT decks, because Chaos was undoubtedly the top deck, along with GOAT Control, a deck that also used a lot of the same cards. However, nowadays, with the likes of Panda Burn and Cat Combo being some of the best decks in the game, it's become far less of a staple and more of a side deck option, although it does also play against Chaos, which is still one of the top 5 best decks in GOAT. In addition to this, Nobleman of Crossout stopped for a couple of years after GOAT format, and soft effect monsters died out in the later O's, early 2010s. So yes, another really good staple from this set, and one that's nowhere near broken, and also inspired in one of the most overrated cards of all time in Crossout does later years later. Now for the lesser known and based on his name and art, more brutal Nobleman, Nobleman of Extermination, which is pretty much the same as Nobleman of Crossout, except for the fact that it hits back row as opposed to set monsters, and it banishes away as many traps it hits as opposed to flip monsters. So yeah, based on description alone, you can tell why this card wasn't played as much as his brother, because there's already much better ways of dealing with back row like MST, Dust Tornado, Harpies, etc, etc. So because of this card saw no play whatsoever. Because, again, why would you play this over a card that can just take out any back row? Next. Up next, we've got the second of 3 revival cards in this set in the Shallow Grave, a normal spell that sets 1 monster from both players' graveyards face down. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, is this the Monster Reborn replacement he was talking about? No, we'll get into that later. In fact, this card didn't see that much play at all because of the symmetrical effect it uses. However, there is one deck that did play this card, and unfortunately, yes, another FTK. You see, there's a deck in GOAT format called Empty Jar, whose whole gameplay was repeatedly using the effects of the jar cards like Cyber, Morphing, etc. to empty both players' hands and make the opponent deck out. And this card, setting a card face down, was one of the best ways to do this, as it lets you use the jar effect multiple times a turn with cards like Book of Moon and Book of Tayu. And that's the only place this card's ever seen in real play. And unfortunately, even nowadays, there's no play there either because empty jars kind of fallen out of favour in GOAT format. So yes, a decent effect that was overshadowed by a bunch of other cards that only saw play in a very degenerate strategy, and even that's now dead. Pity for a really cool artwork. And last but not least in our revival spell trio, we have Premature Burial, an equipped card that for 800 life points can bring a monster back from your graveyard in attack mode, but it leaves the field if the Premature Burial is destroyed. So yeah, pretty much call the Haunted an equipped spell, which you think could be worse because it costs you life points and can't be used on your opponent's turn, but Premature Burial is actually the only revival spell right now that's currently still on the ban list. And why? Because it doesn't destroy the monster if it leaves the field any way other than destruction, meaning that yes, you can bounce this card back to your hand to get multiple revivals, making this card a pretty strong card even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially with Isolde being legal until last week to search it out. So yeah, Premature Burial on the surface may not be as good as Monster Reborn, but any quick look at it can tell you this is one of the most broken rival cards ever printed. Hey, you know what's worse than a card like Respect Play or Eye of Truth that lets you see the opponent's hand and nothing else? How about a card that only lets you see one card from their hand at a cost? That's what Inspection here does. For 500 life points, it's going to let you look at your opponent's hand to see one card in it once per turn. Konami, Respect Play and Eye of Truth were already horrible cards that saw no play. Why do you think this one would see any play at all? Next. Up next, we've got one of my personal favourite cards from this set in Prohibition. A continuous spell card, Prohibition, lets you name one card, and any copies of that card that aren't already on the field can't be used, and their effects can't be used either. Now, as you can imagine, this card is definitely not a main deck card, but it is one of the best side deck cards in certain formats, particularly in more narrow formats where a lot of players are playing the same deck, having lasting major play in Spiral format to counter the opposing super agents. This card reminds me a lot of a card from Magic the Gathering called Pithing Needle, which is one of the most beloved side deck cards in that game, and it's a card I often put in my own deck at locals because I know my local meta quite well. This isn't the most powerful card in the game, but it's definitely one of the more interesting and skill-intensive cards, as it requires you to have knowledge of the opponent's decks to know what best to hit with it. Definitely an interesting card from this set, one of the few times the experimentation in this set actually paid off. And up next we got this set in the manga, aka a card that was in almost every Yu-Gi-Oh! Game Boy Advance game as a kid that I played, and that's just as annoying. Actually closer to the Cyber Jar than Morphing Jar, this card upon flip shuffles all monsters in the field into the owner's decks, and then each player has to execute the top of their deck until they get the same number of monsters, which they can then set face down on the field. So essentially it's basically Cyber Jar minus the graveyard effects they can trigger, and like Cyber Jar, it was used mostly in empty jar decks as a way of easily emptying the opponent's deck, because when you're executing cards, any card you execute that you can't summon goes right to the graveyard. Unfortunately, unlike Cyber Jar, that's really its only use, making this card just an annoying piece of shit that I really hated going against as a kid. Okay people, up next we're going to blaze through 5 entries, with Fire Champion, Twin-Headed Fire Dragon, the Dark Fire Soldiers and Mr. Volcano. All these are fire monsters, they're all normals, and they're all terrible. Flame Champion is by far the worst of the bunch because it's barely better than level 4 vanilla, but it costs a tribute. Yeah, why would I play this when I can play Legion or Battleox, which again, were already not that good by this point. Twin-Headed Fire Dragon the same thing, as in why would you play this over someone's Skull, which again wasn't that good by this point. And Mr. Volcano, same as Fire Dragon, and he also looks like a Pokemon gym leader. Now seriously, look at this card and tell me, does this look more like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Or as a Pokemon card? Now for the Dark Fire Soldiers, which are the best of the bunch. They're 1700 beaters, which basically puts them on the same level as something like Battleox. However, the problem is, by this point, that kind of deck really wasn't that good. With all the control cards that came out in the last couple of sets, aggro really wasn't doing that much at this time, and even the aggro decks that weren't playing villains like this anymore. So these cards would have been fine if they'd been on an LOB or maybe Melvaders, but at this point, they were way past their prime before they even came out. Next. Okay, so now we've got more life gain from this set, so yeah, it's not a very good card, but at least Kisetai here is more interesting than the other cards we've covered so far. A monster that activates when flip face up, though not a flip effect monster, keep that in mind. When this card's attacked, it basically, like the leech it is, attaches to the opponent's monster. It'll then give you life points if you have the monster attack points, for as long as it's equipped to that monster during each of your turns. So yeah, this is definitely an interesting take on life gain, however the problem is twofold. One, it's life gain, which doesn't really do much, and 2, if it did do much, yeah, this card's going to get you like maybe 1 turn of life gain before the opponent tributes the monster off anyway, like even the anime knew this. So yeah, an interesting design, but just not strong enough to see any play. Next. You know, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this card, in the lore of Cybers, becomes Cyber Phoenix at some point. I'm going to assume that is true, and just forget about this card if it existed, and just tell everybody, improve yourself as much as this guy did. Next. Wow, this might be the most disappointing little brother ever. Flankam Queen 1 wasn't a great card, but at least it could give Wind decks more consistency, and probably switch a couple of decent cards. His brother, Flankam Queen 2, is a vanilla 1500 attack points. So yeah, you can be searched by Flankam Queen 1 like Weevil did in the anime, but why bother? Again, this is just a bad vanilla, nothing more to say. Next. Another 1800 beta Sky Scout fits about as well as Legend does in normal beatdown strategies, which again weren't too popular at the time, but if you did want to play them, this was a good card to include. However, the most important thing about this card wasn't his stats, it was his name. You see, this card used to be called Harpy's brother due to a mistranslation before being corrected years later. So yeah, the most interesting thing about this card is that the Harpy ladies disowned him. Next. Up next, much like Jinzo, we've got another card that made famous for its role in the anime in Buster Blader, a 2-tribute warrior with 2600 attack points that gains 500 extra points for every dragon in the opponent's field and in their graveyard, making him one of the first hunter monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh history, or a monster designed to take out one kind of monster in particular. However, unlike Jinzo, this card saw almost no competitive play for a long time because when he was released, 1. The game was dominated by level 4 monsters with a couple of 1 tributes, so something this slow didn't really see any play, and 2. No dragon decks were viable, and nor would they be viable for about a decade after its release, with Blue Eyes rotating out of format pretty much before the set even came out. Because of this, it took his own archetype being printed for Blader to see any play, and even then he's more of a garnet for the archetype than anything else, with several of the deck's cards requiring Busted Blader itself to use their effects, and the retrains only being Busted Blader on the field. So in actuality this card's never really been any good, but him being a garnet for his own archetype does make him better than a lot of cards in this list. While nowhere near a bad card, Michizuri is an example of this set's propensity of having cards that are decent, that are outskilled by other cards. In this case, Michizuri is a normal trap. When a monster in your field is destroyed, destroys one of the opponent's monsters as well. Okay, that's a decent effect, but I could just run Fissure, which is a lot better, or I could run any other piece of removal. See, this is the problem with a lot of cards in this set. It's not that they're bad, it's that they were already power crept before they even came out. Next. Up next, we've got one of the more interesting burn cards I've covered on this series so far, in Minor Goblin Official. A continuous trap card, this card is one of the few ways in Yu-Gi-Oh! To continuously get a burn effect every single turn, as it burns 3 for 500 every turn, in somewhat of a reverse Solemn Wishes effect. The catch, however, is it requires people below 3000 life points for this effect to even work. Because of this, again like a lot of cards in this set, there's better options to play. However, unlike a lot of other cards in the set, I think this card has one good use, and that is in Tall Burn, a deck that uses continuous cards to give small amounts of burn every single turn, and this fits right at home with that with cards like Tall and Chain Energy. Again, that deck's not very good, but this definitely fits in it, and it could be somewhat fun to play and go for one, I guess. Hey kids, want to see how bad a +3 or 4 has to be to never see any play in Yu-Gi-Oh? Let me introduce you to the card, Gamble. A trap card, Gamble lets you draw up to 5 cards in your hand if you have 2 or less in your hand and your opponent has 6 or more. So hey, +3 or 4 depending on how many cards in your hand, right? Yeah, there's one catch though. It's called Gamble for a reason. You've got to quickly call a coin to get this effect, and if you call it wrong, you lose your next turn. So basically, in a lot of games you'll just lose right on the spot. Yeah, drawing 4 or 5 cards is good, but for this cost, it's never worth it. Next. Up next we have the card Attack and Receive. A normal trap, this can only be activated if you take damage, and if you do, your opponent will then take 700 points of damage, plus an additional 300 for every copy of this card in your graveyard. So you could play 3 of this card and do a decent amount of damage, or you could, play Just Desserts, Rukazi, or any other burn spell from this time period that's much more consistent and can do a lot more damage. In fact, a couple steps later we get Magic Cylinder, which makes this card entirely redundant because it's a much better battle trap. Next. Up next we've got another card in the life gain section of this booster set, in Solemn Wishes, which yes, is the worst Solemn card ever made. A continuous trap, Wishes grants its control of 500 life points whenever they draw a card, making it one of the better life gain effects in this set. As one, it's consistent life gain rather than a one-off, meaning in slower games it will actually build up and make somewhat of an impact, but more importantly it combos the best with Fire Princess, a card that burns the opponent for 500 points whenever you gain life, meaning these 2 cards will cause a 1000 life point difference every turn. Now yes, this Princess Burn deck was never great, being a slightly rogue at best option in gold format, but that's still better than most life gain in this set, so I'll take it. Next. Counterbalancing the life gain of Solemn Wishes, up next we have Skull Invitation, another continuous trap card that burns a player for 300 points whenever a card they control goes to the graveyard. Sadly, unlike Solemn Wishes, this card really has no use, because 1. The amount of burn that it inflicts is minimal, meaning there are way better options for burn players, and 2. Because the effect is symmetrical, this card really punishes you for being behind. As every time you lose a card, you're making yourself easier and easier to kill, which a non-burn player can do with their monsters, often far quicker than you can with your burn spells. Cool art though. Next. Okay, before I talk about this card's effect, I just want to talk about the name for a second. Bubonic Vermin. otherwise known as a plague rat. So basically they got around making a card that would offend parents by making the words more complicated so kids wouldn't understand them as easy. That's an interesting way of doing it, I suppose. Anyway, what's the effect? When flipped, it summons another copy from the deck in face down defense position. So it's just a normal manga, but a lot worse. Next. Literally the thing interesting about this card is it's called Dark Bat, but it's a wind monster. Nothing else. Next. A machine with weak stats, only tank 234s, only claim to fame is being on annoying cards like Chicken Game and the infamous pole position, so at least will be remembered unlike most of the villas from this set. A level 4 1600 attack vanilla, Overdrive is pretty much the quintessential basic vanilla monster in Yu-Gi-Oh! This I imagine is why for years he was one of the best cards in a very small Yu-Gi-Oh! Starter set, made to teach kids how to play the game. Again, it's nothing special, but having to teach new players how to play this great game, I have to give this card at least some praise. Next. Another example of this set's bizarre habit of having cards that are okay, but already crept by much older cards. Burning Land can destroy one field spell on activation, so not bad, but why would I play this over MST? In addition to this, however, it'll also burn a player for 500 points during their standby phase. Again though, much better burn spells. In fact, some of the ones I covered before in this thing are much better, because they only burn your opponent, not yourself. So again, two okay effects that are overshadowed by much better cards. Next. Okay, now again some of this set's broken cards. In fact, with one notable exception, maybe the best card in this set. A normal spell, Cold Wave can only be activated at the start of main phase 1, because it's usually put onto very powerful cards, so that's a good start. Then upon activation, it essentially freezes all of the back row on the field for anything being used, and also prevents new back row from being set or activated this turn. Now at first, although this card was always considered powerful, it didn't see much play, being second fiddle to cards like Heavy Storm and Harpy's Feather Duster, because at the start of Yu-Gi-Oh! There wasn't nearly as many graveyard effects on back row, so I just stunned the cards and you could just pop them instead. But as both those cards got banned, this card slid in to fill the power vacuum they left behind, especially in back row heavy anti-meta decks like Gladiator Beasts, with the idea going second was to lock down the back row of the opponent, get in for damage with fusions, and then set your own back row once the opponents had been unlocked. Now I said that the Cold Wave is one of the strongest cards in this set, and this is one of the few cards from early Yu-Gi-Oh! That has actually gotten better and better as power creep has happened. As nowadays, fusing the opponent's back row is likely to be more powerful than outright destroying it, as there's much more back row with graveyard effects than there used to be, which also is the Heavy Storm is still banned, while Harpy's isn't. And if you're winning in one shot, like often the case in Yu-Gi-Oh!, it doesn't matter where the back row is as long as the opponent's not using it. So in other words, this is one of the most powerful cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, and I doubt it'll ever be off the ban list again. As shown by Air Knight Parshath's years of play in both Goat Control and Chaos decks in Goat format, piercing effects were pretty good in early Yu-Gi-Oh!, with the game being dominated by low defense flip monsters like Magician of Faith and Morphing Jar, as well as the zero defense token summoning Scapegoat being one of the most played cards at the time. So you'd think a card like this that can turn every card into half an Air Knight Parshath would be okay at least. Well, sadly not really, as while piercing is powerful as hell in early Yu-Gi-Oh!, stapling into a card most decks can't search wasn't the best. That being said, however, there are a few goat decks that Fairy Crush could in theory have been decent in. First with Benkei OTK, which is a deck that loads up Armed Samurai Benkei with multiple equips, so you can attack multiple times, and the second is some of the Warrior Toolbox decks that have started running Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu. However, this card will never see play for one big reason. There's a better version in Goat format in Big Bang Shot, which not only grants piercing damage, but also a 400 point boost at the cost of destroying the monster if it leaves play. That being said, if you wanted an option that's better for grindier games, this could be a decent side grade, but I doubt it'll catch on unfortunately. You hear that sound? That's the sound of a Cyber Twin Dragon hitting for over 10,000 points of damage. A quick play spell, limited removal doubles the attack of all your machines, at the cost of destroying them at the end phase. So basically this card's got no downside at all, because if you're doing all your machines points, some of the biggest monsters in this game, you're probably winning that turn if not interrupted. Like I said, this card saw the most amount of play in Cyber Dragon OTK decks, both in the mid-2000s and the mid-2010s, to buff up one of their cards with multiple attacks, including Twin Dragon or Rampage Dragon, to one-shot the opponent. However, it also has a few other homes, including occasionally seen play in older variants of Train decks, and also in Cosmo with way for the slow control deck to win it out of nowhere with one of the big ships. Pretty much one of the faces of OTK strategies, Limits Removal will always be a decent card despite power creep, as one of the most enduring non-ban worthy cards from this set. Up next we have by far the worst of this set's life gain effects in Reign of Mercy, which grants you 1000 extra life points, which yes is more than Mystical Elf or Healer, but it compensates for this by also giving your opponent 1000 life points. What? Okay, so not only are you running life gain, which gives us no field advantage, but also making an opponent even harder to kill while doing so. Yeah, no thanks. In the anime, this card could draw you 5 cards and shuffle all monsters in your field and your old hand back into the deck. Not bad. In real life, it draws you the same number of cards you put back, often making it a -1, but it also only spins back 1 monster to your deck from the field. Either way, both versions suck. Moving on. A normal trap, Shift, in addition to being one of my favourite pieces of background art to use on this channel, allows us to essentially choose targets for our opponent by letting us choose where an attack or back row is aimed at. I mean, that's okay I guess, but it doesn't deal with back row like Solemn Judgment or MST would, and it doesn't deal with attacks like Mirror Force or Ring would, so why play with some of those? Here's a hint, you don't. For those who don't know, in addition to Yu-Gi-Oh! I also play Magic the Gathering, and one of my all-time favourite cards in that game is Birthing Pod. An artifact card, think something similar to continuous spells in Yu-Gi-Oh! In this case. Pod lets you sacrifice a creature to get one that's 1 level stronger, and goes through a chain of bigger and bigger cards in a toolbox-like strategy. It's one of my favourite decks to play in Magic before it got banned, and a similar fit in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think would have been awesome. Well, it turns out there is one in Insect Imitation. Just that it's a one-shot that only works on the worst type in Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time, that only has 1 card that combos with it. I suppose I should be more careful what I wished for. I should have said I wish for a good Birthing Pod effect in Yu-Gi-Oh! Next. A normal spell, which will kill this card, but we'll get that in a second. Dimension Hole has a unique effect in that it's one of the few ways in Yu-Gi-Oh! To do what is known in Magic as flickering a card, meaning to remove it from play and then return it back to play. Now granted, it's not as strong as in Yu-Gi-Oh! As it would be in Magic, as it don't have many effects to trigger on entering the field rather than summoning, but if it had been a quick play spell, it could have been used as a way of dodging removal or blanking attacks, among other things. Unfortunately, Dimension Hole is not a quick play, meaning this card's only actual use is removing a monster from the field before you Dark Hole. What a waste of some great potential. Next. I remember when Link format first started and people thought this card would actually be good. Ground Collapse is a continuous spell that shut off 2 of the opponent's monster zones, so people thought, okay, I'll just use this in the 2 zones that the Link monster opens up. Not bad in theory, except for the fact that Link summoning didn't actually slow the game down at all, so he wouldn't get a chance to use this card in that way before the opponents used those zones already. Now this card did see a little bit of play though in GOAT. In slow stall decks with the goal to lock off the entire field. Basically what you do is you play this card along with something like a Jammer Trio or Spatial Collapse and basically lock your opponent out of the game. That's right people, Castiera was a thing in 2005. Next. If you're a fan of fellow GOAT format enjoyer Yuki Nono, you've likely already seen his video on how good this card can be in GOAT. If not, I'll leave a link in the description for you. A counter trap similar to Magic Jammer and Curse Seal the Forbidden Spell, this card can be used to counter a spell like those cards, however the cost to it is very unique. You see, while Jammer requires you to discard any card and negate a spell, this card requires your opponent to discard a card, and not any card but a spell to prevent the negation. On the surface, a negligible difference. In GOAT, however, this can be a crippling negative added to all the game's best cards at the time. Think about it. Now Graceful Charity requires 3 discards, Pot of Greed leaves you with no more cards in your hand than when you started, and Duo now makes both players discard. And that's the best case scenario for the opponent versus this card. An underlooked gem in GOAT, especially in trap heavy decks. I fully expect Drain to start seeing more play in the format in the next couple of years. I'd like to thank Yu-Gi-Oh! Jesus here for making me realise how good it was. A continuous trap, infinite dismissal, destroys any level 3 or lower monster that turn their normal or flip summoned, making it one of the more unique floodgates in this game. Pity that it doesn't special summon monsters that would make it nearly useless. Oh well, next. Up next, we've got a character by a few times on this channel. It's Gravity Bind. A continuous trap, Gravity Bind prevents all monsters level 4 or higher from attacking, making one of the first good floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh history. This card, as you can imagine, was most commonly used in stall burn strategies that played only small or no monsters at all, with the goal being to stall your opponent and burn them to death. However, it also saw play in Ben KOTK strategies, where the idea was to play this card, lock down the board so you couldn't die for a few turns, build up your Ben K with a bunch of equips, and then giant trade the board to bounce back your floodgate, re-equip the cards to Ben K, and then swing for an OTK. One of the better cards in this set, this card saw play for about 5 years, going from the Goat Burn to the CO Burns 2007, and only stopped seeing play when the game got too fast for it. So this makes it one of the best cards and most enduring cards in this set. I'm telling you now that one day this card will be banned. And if you think I'm crazy, just remember that no one was playing Mass Driver for over a decade until someone figured out Frog FTK, and now that card is banned with no chance of ever coming back off the list, because it can burn in a limited amount of times in one turn. So all it takes for this card to get the same fate will be someone find a spell loop that lets you recycle multiple spells a turn for discard fodder. Mark my words, keep all this will get banned one day. I guarantee it. So what happens when you take one of the few decent cards from LOB and make it worse in every way? You get Shadow of Eyes, a normal trap that turns a defense monster into attack, making it a bad stop defense at best, because while stop can turn any defense monster into attack position, all Eyes can do is to turn a flip monster into attack position. Actually no, it's even worse than that, as this card can only flip cards that have just been set. So with all these restrictions, why not just run stop defense, or even better, you know, good cards. Next. Another anime card popular in Joey's deck, the Legendary Fishman, one of several cards that was designed to work with Umi. Although I wouldn't call it an archetype yet, as there are so few cards and they don't have much overlap beyond needing Yumi. In this case, this monster gets two bonuses. First, it is unaffected by spell cards, and secondly, it can't be attacked while Umi is on the field, although it doesn't prevent your opponent from attacking you directly. Like many cards in this set, this card falls into the category of OK monster would have been a lot better minus the tribute. But it's still an OK card, I think. Its spell protection does make it hard to remove, until it gets ringed, one problem at a time here people. And with Legendary Ocean, it can become an OK beater, but it's not too powerful to be worth a tribute. Next. A 2 tribute monster with 2450 attack points. Sword Hunter already had enough of battle to be good, given he has barely more stats than many 1 tributes that are much better, so it's a pity if then his effect isn't very good either. When this card's first monster in battle, that monster can be turned into an equips card that gives this card a 200 point buff. So for the cost of clogging up your back row with useless cards, you can maybe make this guy stronger than a blue-eyed white dragon before he gets ringed or get you breaked away anyway. Yeah, that really isn't worth it, is it? Now yes, I'm aware that this card could be cast as Graveyard Hate, and it could be used to remove light and darks from decks like Chaos, but there are much better options in GOAT to do that, and it's not worth 2 tributes for it. Okay, so I said earlier that Parasite was a unique casual deck for the time, and by that same token, Drill Bug is an OK searcher for that kind of deck. An armor attack monster, the bug can search Parasite at the top of your deck upon inflicting battle damage. Yeah, it's slow and it's terrible and anything competitive, but for a unique casual deck, it's decent enough, I guess. I'd like to point out that in the anime, this card had a continuous magic cylinder effect that required 2 sacrifices per use. Not a great effect because it requires quite a steep cost to use, but made it a lot better than the version we actually got in real life, which is just a regular beater that's unaffected by spells if Yumi is on the field. Basically, Legendary Fishman will have the attack resistance or allowing the opponent to attack directly, which makes it decent in Legendary Ocean decks, but not much good anywhere else. The biggest issue with this card is twofold. One, it's a tribute monster, and two, it would only see play in GOAT, a format dominated by Ring of Destruction and Mirror Force, so its spell resistance is kinda useless in that case. Honestly though, reduce this card by 1 star and make it a normal summon, and it would have been okay in my opinion. Another useless flip monster, Bite Shoes, just changes the monster's position on the field while keeping it face up. Now I get it. From a flip perspective, the monster steps in the shoe, gets bitten and kneels in pain in defense mode, but that flavor win doesn't make up for how bad this card is. This card is an 800 attack, 1 tribute vanilla beta machine, who has worse than a 4-star machine. What else can I say about this? Next. Okay, this effect will be bad enough on a 4-star monster, but brings this card on summon slacks a monster on the field and prevents it from being able to attack as long as it's on the field. But the fact that Invasion of Dark Sleep also requires a tribute for a card with stats that will be bad on level 4 is just insulting. If you do summon a big monster with this card, Sleep will be dead so fast you might as well not have bothered. Just run more removal rather than this abomination of a card. Next. So here we have the weakest monster in the game in Thousand Eyes Idol, a 0 attack and 0 defense normal monster. This card was never meant to be summoned and only exists to be fusion material for the best fusion in the game at the time, Thousand Eyes Restrict. Pity that the instant fusion metamorphosis exists, so it's even good for that. What a waste of paper this card is. The complete opposite of its fusion material, Thousand Eyes Restrict is not just one of the most powerful cards in this set, but was arguably the best fusion monster in Yu-Gi-Oh! Until the Gladiator Beast came out in 2008. A fusion requiring Relinquish, which we covered in the Spell Ruler video, and the awful card we just covered, this card's fusion material may as well be flavor text, because we'll never be summoning it that way, as this was the best card for years to get off Metamorphosis, and is still to this day a very decent instant fusion target. Why, you ask? Because in addition to having Relinquished's monster stealing effect, where it can turn a monster into an equip powering it up, this card also spellbinding circles the entire rest of the field, meaning no monsters other than it can attack or change their battle positions. Now Relinquish was already a good card, but a version that doesn't require a ritual to be summoned, that can be slotted into any deck using Scapegoat, was borderline broken in 2005. The reason for this is that this card was essentially an out to any monster in Goat, and you could just metamorphosis this out, suck up a big monster like say BLS, and then either stall the game with restricted spellbinding circle effect while beating down with it, or find a way to either flip or destroy the restricted cards like Tsukiyomi or a tribute summon. This card was so powerful in fact it pretty much all classic Goat decks riot, to the point where it was banned for a good 10 years after Goat format. Even after Metamorphosis was banned by itself, which is a bit weird, but okay. And what's crazy is when it came back 10 years later, it was still decent, with it being one of the best cards to get off Metamorphosis' much worse counterpart, Instant Fusion. Especially when Link format started, what you could do is you could summon this card with Instant Fusion, suck up a monster, link it away for a Link 1 or Link 2, and give you great access to 1 to 2 non-destruction removals. One of the few examples of an old broken card not completely killed by this game's power creep, Thousand Eyes is by far one of the best monsters in this set and one of the top 10 cards in this set as well. Another 1700 attack normal monster, Girochin Kuogata, I think I pronounced that right, pretty much has all the same pros and cons as the Dark Fire Warriors and other monsters of the same stats like Battle Ox, which made a great card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Cover format, but in this set it's a bit past its prime. I'm not saying a beatdown deck couldn't have run it, but there's enough better cards at this point that this card was kind of obsolete. A very simple effect, Hayabusa Knight can attack twice during the same battle phase. Now at 1000 attack this card is a little weak for such an effect in many cases, however he does have some use in warrior aggro decks to play a couple of equips to make it stronger, or as a side deck choice against chaos decks that play a lot of small flip monsters or goat decks that of course use goat tokens. So overall a little weak for his job, but still a good hard worker and a useful beater under the right circumstances. So on flip, this card reveals a set monster and then if it has an effect, destroys it. So you could put this card, let me shoot another card, Man-Eater Bug. This is literally just a worse Man-Eater Bug, a card that, to remind you, was barely seen play at this point. What were they thinking with this card? A level 3 flip monster, Force the Ladybug of Doom, is one of the more unique flip monsters in this set, and also in my opinion one of the most underused. On flip this card acts like a mini Raigeki, destroying all the opponent's level 4 monsters. I'd like to remind you this came out in 2003, and had it dominated by normal summons, all of which were level 4s. I'm generally surprised that there never saw even much side deck play, because this could cripple several decks. I guess you could argue it's situational compared to some other removal cards, but in GOAT, when all Bob were actually illegal, I'm surprised that didn't see some side deck play against decks like Gravekeepers, whose decks mostly consider level 4s. This card was the start of the Gradius archetype, which won an SGC once, as one of the few times can be put a direct reference to their own games in Yu-Gi-Oh! None of them makes this card any good, mind, but at least it gave me something to talk about, unlike most bad vanillas from this set. Talk about wasting a great effect on an awful card. Vampire Baby's 700 attack zombie, keep those stats in mind, with a powerful effect of stealing any monster it destroys, making it the very first Yugioh Guardian-like effect, which for the time would be really great. Or at least it would be if this thing could actually beat over anything worth stealing. Who thought putting in this kind of effect on a card with only 700 points was a good idea, because it means to get any use for this card, you need to play a bunch of equipped cards on it, making it a magnet for removal. Seriously, just double this card's attack and this card would have seen play in some zombie decks at the time of the tech option. Oh, well, it might have been for us zombie players. Another simple effect monster here, Mad Sword Beast, is a 1400 attack dino that pierces, meaning it does damage no matter what board the monster is in. Meaning against decks throwing a lot of flippers like Magician of Faith, Magical Merchant, or that run GOAT tokens, it could have been good. Pity by the time that became relevant if we had a better option in Enraged Battleox. Oh well. Pretty much everything I said about the 1650 monsters in the Spellware episode also applies here. Skull Mariner is an okay 1600 beta for the time, that was an ideal inclusion in budget or first time decks. But like Overdrive, there were much better options once you got some starter decks in your hands. Next. Much like Overdrive and a few other cards in this set, All-Seeing White Tiger was seen a lot in teaching starter kits. Unlike Overdrive, however, this card has next to no use, being a 1300 vanilla outclassed by even cards like Celtic Guardian and Winged Dragon Guardian the Fortress, so it isn't even that good as a teaching aid in those little packs. Next. Now this is how you make a balanced beta. A 2300 attack level 4, Goblin Attack Force is one of the biggest 4 stars ever made, but as you can imagine this power comes with a price, as 1 it has no defense points, and 2 it's forced into defense position after attacking and is stuck there for a turn afterwards. Now you think that this big downside would make this card unplayable like many other cards in this set, but no, in fact this card is actually part of Earth Aggro, one of the best decks in GO format currently, due to 1 being a great beta early game, and 2, even if it does die, being a great banish target for one of the deck's other large betas in Gigantes, which we'll cover in the IOC episode. In addition to this card also works well with Skill Drain, which many beatdown decks played at the time, including Earth Aggro like I said, and Beast Down, along with the Skill Drain beatdown deck that while rogue at best was still fun to play back in GOAT, because who doesn't love dropping a 2000 attack beta for no tribute. It's a giant soldier stone with lower attack points, but it's also a giant turtle, meaning it's automatically awesome. No further questions, next! Costs to make tributes for its stats and has no effect. So it's got nice art and a good attribute, I suppose. Next. In the anime, this card along with 2 other monsters made a Regeki, which ought to be an inefficient board wipe, but the real version doesn't even have that. Next. Like awesome for a reason if they were as lame in life as they are here in death. But they did get an anime appearance for literally like a second. Next. Low stats, no effect, bad type and attribute combo, nothing else to say if the whole package is shit. Next. Okay, we've seen many examples of failed cards in these videos, however here we've got an example of a card who failed, but paved the way for one of the game's best cards in its early years, so points there I guess. At level 6 with 2200 attack points, Fiend Mega Cyber is underpowered compared to the likes of Summon Skull or Jinzo, but has an effect to try and make up for this. If your opponent controls 2 or more monsters, this card can be special summoned from your hand. If that sounds familiar to a really broken card from later on in Yu-Gi-Oh, you're right. Besides with just 1 extra number, this card went from Meta Warp like the other card to Fringe at best. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, when Cyber Dragon was released 3 years later, it pretty much warped the meta, explaining many GOAT staples, because it was a 2100 attack monster that could be special summoned for free if the opponent controlled a monster and you didn't, meaning that many GOAT beaters were now unusable because they could easily be beaten up by this card. Fiend Mega Cyber by comparison is little to no play despite being similar, because requiring the opponent to have 2 monsters is a lot worse, and makes the card dead in your hand far more often than Cyber Dragon did, particularly in the mid-2000s where Fear of a Mirror Force drove many players to race summon multiple monsters in turn. So like I said, this card didn't see much play and wasn't that good, but the fact that it paved the way for one of the best cards in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Gives it some point in this list in my eyes. Ever hear the phrase, "don't judge a book by its cover"? Well, let me show you why with Gearfried the Iron Knight, a level 4 800 beater whose only effect is any card equipped to him automatically destroys itself. At first glance you're thinking, okay, decent beat sake for the time that can't be snatch stealed. Now look again and you see the most powerful combo enabler in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Capable of blowing up cards, ripping apart hands, and even drawing your whole deck in one shot. Yes, surprisingly, the blowing up your unequipped cards was really good in early Yu-Gi-Oh! First up with this card we have Blast with Chain, which in addition to giving a monster 500 point buff upon equipment, also destroys a card and moves into the graveyard. Not a bad start. Then we have Smoke Raider the Thief, a card people might remember from Infernal Knight's Days of Terror. That rips a card out of the opponent's hand when it's entered the graveyard. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. And then we have Butterfly Dagger Elmer, a card from one of the game's first and worst archetypes. That can't be too bad, right? Wrong! You see, while no one cared about its 300 point boost effect, its other effect broke this card so badly it's still banned to this day. You see, Elmer's broken effect is when it's sent to the graveyard, it comes right back to your hand. Yes, every time, as in not once per turn, meaning that yes, you can infinitely equip this card to Gearfried, creating infinite spell counters and drawing your whole deck with Royal Magical Library, creating any number of FTKs, most commonly Exodia. Not bad for a innocuous beater, eh? Another simple effect, Insect Barrier, pretty much does what it says on the tin. It prevents insect monsters from attacking, making it the ideal card to pair with Parasite. Again, like Parasite, this card isn't very good, as insects were rarely played at the time outside of Maya to Bug, and relying on the opponent drawing Parasite wasn't a very good way to form a strategy, but again, at least there was an attempt at an interesting combo here, so I'll give it that. Next. Okay, a worse summon skull nearly a year after the first reprint. Why? No, seriously, let's consider for a second, please. It's 2003. Starter decks were available in many toy shops along with boosters like this, but what you got was randomised. Buying singles was a lot more difficult than it is nowadays, with eBay being in its infancy, so many kids likely only had a couple of options to get cards. So knowing this, why print a card like this that is worse than a much easier card to get in every way? Nothing else to say about this, moving on. Wow, this set has been making up for all the awful secret rares we got in the other sets, as we not only end this with another great top-end rare card, but arguably one of the strongest cards ever made in Imperial Order, a card whose name strikes fear into the heart of every Sky Striker and Pearly player. One of the few cards to be broken and banned in 2 different eras of Yu-Gi-Oh! Order upon release had the following effect. As long as we're face up on the field, Order negates all spell cards. Yes, you heard that right, this one card shut off around a third of most people's decks at the time. I know I said that Jinzo was balanced earlier, but as you might have noticed, Jinzo is a monster that can be run over in battle, or, you know, removed with spell effects. And more to the point, usually only took down about a fifth of an opponent's deck at the time. By contrast, the only way for you, or his opponent, to remove this card was with one specific trap, Dust Tornado, or Jinzo. Not many options here, but I know what you're thinking, it's symmetrical, right? Shut down your own spells too. It can't be that bad. Ah, no. You see, its original form, Order had a maintenance cost of 700 life points a turn to keep it active, that was optional to pay. Now this was meant to be a downside, but all this meant was you could flip this card on your opponent's turn, turn off all their spells, and then get rid of it on your own turn before you suffered any downsides, at which point you had a massive advantage over your opponent. As you can imagine, this card wasn't long for this world, being one of the first cards to be banned, where it remained for over a decade. But then in the mid-2010s it received an errata and was granted parole off the list to see if it was still as broken as it used to be, with the maintenance cost now paid during both players' turns and not being optional. So problem solved? No. The problem was that this errata came way too late, and by the time it was in effect, the downside didn't matter, as in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Many decks can now function without spell cards at all once their field is set up, meaning that going first this card had pretty much no downside, and it made it nearly impossible for spell-focused decks like Sky Strikers to do anything. Making it one of the few cards in the game's history to come off the list with an errata and still be broken enough to warrant a rebanning. And I highly doubt we'll see them try and make this card work for a third time, but who knows at this point. Not only the strongest card in this set, but one of the strongest Yu-Gi-Oh cards ever made, Imperial Order is a fine way to end this set, and it also makes it one of the game's early standouts. And that was Pharaoh's Servant. In my opinion, not as broken a spell ruler, with one exception, obviously. In fact, I give this one of the best early sets, and was one of the more balanced ones, with the game definitely pushing the power of cards, but of making them so undertested and broken that they had to be banned for years like Spell Ruler. Cards like Jinzo are fan favourites, and other cards like Mega Cyber, even if they weren't good, did influence this game a lot. Thank you all for watching this one, and next time we take a look at Labyrinth of Nightmare. Yeah, that's not going to be as good this one, I'm afraid. See you then.